Hello everyone, Ohieva, if I pronounce rightly. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Naoko Mabon. I'm a freelance curator based in Oban. In case you don't know where Oban is, it is a small town on the west coast of Scotland. I am the facilitator of today's event, which is the first of the conversation series of Eco Creative Cluster project. Eco Creative Cluster is a project to weave a network to connect different creative practitioners and practices, focusing similarly on nature-based materials and dyeing techniques such as eco printing. It involves developing a dye garden with the lead artist Deborah Gray, who is with us today, and local volunteers in the ground of the Rockfield Center, a newly refurbished cultural and heritage hub located in the heart of Oban. Although we haven't been able to quite fully start this stage of gardening due to the COVID restriction in the original plan, the fruits of this dye garden will create workshops such as natural dyeing, eco printing, and shibori led by Deborah. And in parallel to this dye garden development with myself, the project also aims to weave a broader network of practitioners working across localities based on ecological and sustainable approaches and consciousness, which will generate further collaborations locally, nationally, and internationally. Eco Creative Cluster is a project of the Rockfield Center funded by CHART, which stands for Culture, Heritage and Arts Network for Argyll and the Isles, as part of their Placemakers Microcluster Networks program. This program is developed in partnership with the Innovation School at the Glasgow School of Art and funded by Creative Scotland. As part of this network weaving, roughly every month, we meet and make several virtual conversation events with different artists. And the first practitioner to meet is our lead artist, Deborah Gray. Deborah is a textile artist based in Oban, like myself, working mainly in wool and upcycled natural textiles. One theme of her recent work has been an exploration of the links between the work itself and the place in which the materials were grown and the work was created. In 2018 and 19, Deborah was artist in residence at the Icelandic Textile Center in Brondås, as well as leading workshops in various locations to teach diverse textile techniques. She has presented her work in exhibitions and textile festivals in and outside of Scotland. I will pass over to Deborah here so that she can talk more about her practice. And after Deborah's presentation, I will have a short interview with her, which will be followed by a Q&A session with the audience members. So please feel free to kind of compose and ask a question then. Okay, so over to you, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you, Naoko. That's lovely. I'm going to share my screen, which will just take a moment. And then you'll be able to see the presentation. And I'll show you some images of recent work. In a minute. Here we are. Okay, so I'm based, as Naoko said, I'm based in Oban. This is more or less the view from outside my front door. And for a long time now, I've been very inspired by nature and natural environment, natural surroundings, and looking at materials. I'm a very material focused practice. So I've been a spinner and a natural dyer for something over 40 years, and eco-printing perhaps a little bit less than that, maybe 9 or 10 years. And so that's the kind of work that I do. And I've also been teaching most of these skills for quite a number of years as well. And my recent works over the last 3-4 years, I've kind of grouped together under this title of the land, and exploring and reflecting the influence of the land on the materials that grow there, and which I use to create the work, as Naoko said, where possible in that place. And then again, when possible, close that circle by bringing the work into the landscape where the materials were originally grown. And there's different aspects of the land that I'm interested in. They're listed here, so geology, climate, landscape, particularly the plants and the animals, and I'm going to talk about those first, and the water and the light. So looking most directly at the plants that grow, which not only produce colour that I can use, but also feed the animals, which produce the fibre that I use. As Naoko said, I really work mainly in wool. And I've done a lot of work in Iceland during 2 residencies at the Textile Centre in Blönduós, and I'm particularly fascinated by the wool of Icelandic sheep, because it's quite different from most other sheep's wool. The sheep in Iceland have been genetically isolated for a very long time. It's now, I believe, illegal to actually import any other breed of sheep into Iceland. And they're adapted to this particularly rugged, harsh climate, so that they have these 2 types of fibre, and this has been really important in the last few years. There's an outer fibre, which you can see the longer, curlier bits in the pictures, called tog, and then an inner coat of a different fibre type, which is called fell. And see photographs here. The one on the left has the tog fibres. Obviously, this is from 2 different sheep, a black one and a white one. But the black tog fibres, really long. I mean, those are measuring about 25 centimetres or more, and that's by no means the longest ones. The fell fibres are much shorter, probably 5-10 centimetres, and very soft and fluffy compared to the outer tog fibres, and they have different purposes. The outer tog fibres are really water resistant, and water just slides off them and it keeps dry, whereas the inner fell fibres are very warm. And it's possible to separate these fibres, and it's very laborious to do that. But what I did in my first residency in Iceland was I spent hours and hours separating the fibres, spinning them by hand, and that then produced a range of different yarns. Sometimes I recombined the tog and the fell yarns at a later stage, or I used them separately. And these are some examples of yarns that I produced using either tog or fell. I use black, natural black, as well as white, so that I could sort of highlight the differences in the texture and the structures that I was producing. This isn't quite all of the ones that I did, but some of I think the more interesting ones, and they're not terribly obvious. Some of them are not terribly obvious in photographs, but the differences in texture when you really see the samples are quite remarkable. And photographs that are in these mounts are all the landscape round about Blönduós in northwest Iceland. And at the bottom right-hand photograph is the farm where the black sheep was raised. I then also went on to use local plants to produce dyes and colour the yarns. And for this part of the work, I used yarn that was either pure tog fibre or yarn that was pure thell fibre. And having spun them, I then dyed one skein of each in the same dye bath using various different plants at times to see what the difference would be. And I was quite surprised by I thought there would be a difference because the fibres are so different in texture. But I had expected that the water-resistant outer tog fibres would take up less dye than the soft inner thell fibres, but in fact, it was the other way around, which was a bit of a surprise, but it was consistent every dye bath that I tried, and I tried about 35 dye baths during that residency, all with local plants. The result was the same, that the tog always took more colour. So as an example, I used the flowers of the lupins. These are really common in Iceland. They were introduced in the 1940s as a soil stabilization measure. There's a lot of wind erosion of soil in Iceland, but the lupins have been extremely successful and they're now very widespread and fairly controversial. Some people think it's a benefit, some people think they're a blot on the landscape, but there's certainly a lot of them. And I gathered huge potfuls of the flowers, as you can see in the picture, and dyed the fibre with the flowers to get these nice shades of green. The leaves give you a bright yellow. And these are some of the examples of the dye samples that I produced while I was on the residency. And again, each one represents one particular plant and a range of colours that I obtained from that plant, comparing the tog yarn and the thell yarn, and also sometimes different parts of the plant, different treatments after dyeing. So there's a bit more information about this on my website. If anybody wants a bit more detail, or can get in touch with me about the detail of it. It's just a romp through. While I was on my second residency in Blönduós, there was also a photographer in residence whose project was called Dressing the Icelandic Landscape, and she really wanted to take photographs of textiles in the landscape. And she was particularly attracted by the textiles that I had created from that landscape, if you like, so the local cheap and local plants for the dye. And she took a series of really quite remarkable photographs, a few of them here to show you. So this one is some yarn which I dyed with lupin, this is with lupin leaves, and photographed tangled round a dry lupin seed head on the beach. Another one, lupin dyed wool in a basalt rock. All of the detail in these photographs. And there's a couple more here from that series. So that was an unexpected but really enjoyable collaboration that took part in that residency. So another aspect of the landscape that I really wanted to explore, particularly while I was in Iceland, was the geology. Obviously everywhere is underpinned by its geology, but in Iceland that's really obvious. Geology seems to be right on the surface. And one of the features that fascinated me are the basalt columns, widespread in Iceland, and we have them here in Fingal's Cave and in Ireland and the Giant's Causeway as well. So I started working with some yarn which I'd spun from the Icelandic sheep in the natural grey colour, and then some grey fleece that I'd dyed with local plants. And I started to knit these irregular hexagons to reflect the basalt columns, the shape of the top of the basalt columns. And then towards the end of the residency, took the work, which was still in progress, out into the landscape, photograph it. This shows it in progress. It was actually quite complicated because the columns are not particularly, they're all six-sided, but they're not regular. And I wanted to reflect that in the piece. It meant that each one had to be knitted to fit the exact space that it was meant to go in, and then had to be attached to the growing piece of work before I could calculate what size to make the next one. And it's just a single column. You can see how the column has eroded and got this depression in the middle, which I've reflected with the coloured centres in the knitted piece. And on the day I took that photograph, that depression was full of ice because it was -8 degrees. Stunning place. And these are a couple of Sigrid's photographs of the almost finished piece out on the frozen shore at Blondos in very low temperatures. And although these photographs were taken at noon, it was very low light as well, which I think gives them a nice quality. Another element about in the landscape is water, and including the sea. This bay, which Blondos sits at the edge of, is called Hunafloy, and the studios in the textile centre look out over the bay, and the weather is constantly changing. The colour of the water and the way the sky is reflected in the water changes all the time. And also in winter, there's a lot of ice flowing down the river and flowing out over the sea. Sometimes has an appearance a bit like porridge floating out over the sea. And so I wanted to do a piece of work that reflected all those different colours of the sea. So I started working on what turned out to be a jacket, and I've used about 15 different shades of blues and greys, and a very simple motif of repeated waveforms. You've got the beach with the ice from the river getting washed up by the sea. Now, a couple of details there of the jackets. It's a very warm zip jacket. Light is a really important feature as well, and again, being beside the sea and in a northerly climate and with a very open aspect, the light is changing constantly. So when I was there in November 2019, I kept a record of the colours in the sky as the day progressed, every day for 30 days, the whole of November. And from that, I developed this knitted piece using as many colours as I could to reflect that. I think there are like 28 colours in it. Took a lot of photographs, but I also wrote down these observations, probably up to 20 observations a day, recording 3 different colours, if there were 3 different colours, up to 3 colours. And so in the morning, there's a typical pre-dawn picture on the left there, and that's the sort of morning section of the knitted piece. A morning photograph, and this is the work in progress. I decided on a scale of 1 stitch representing 5 minutes, and each ridge in the knitting represents 1 day. So it's quite a huge piece of knitting, and took a long time. It took me a long time. You can see at the top of the picture on the right one of my notebook pages with the observations, and it took me quite a long time to work out how to get from the observations to being able to knit the finished piece. I knew what I wanted the finished piece to look like and what I expected it to look like, but actually how to get from one to the other took a little bit of working out. But I got there in the end, and it took me I think it took me 48 days to knit it. There's a picture of it before it was mounted, but you might notice in this picture, as well as all the different colours in the middle section, which represent daytime, in the outer dark sections, which are the nighttime, dark part of the day, there are some shiny green threads worked in, particularly you can see them on the left. And that's because in 30 days, we're lucky enough to have 10 sightings of the Northern Lights. the weather was extraordinarily good for November, and a lot of clear weather and a lot of good sightings of the Northern Lights. So I had to record those in the piece as well. And this is another of Sigrid's photographs. One thing I learned is you don't get a photograph of the Northern Lights with an old mobile phone. Right, quick kitten. So this is the finished piece. It's mounted as a cylinder, 72 centimeters in diameter, so quite wide, and it's about 45 centimeters deep. And it hangs on a swivel so that it can turn. And it actually takes very little air movement to make it turn. It just moves very gently and slowly round. And so that you can follow the days, goes from darkness to light with the sunrise colours, and then goes through the day, and then sunset colours and back into darkness. Another piece that I did that was again influenced by the light, but rather than observations taken repeatedly day after day for a whole month, this was a single observation of the colours in the sky just the end of a really heavy downpour of rain. And that's literally in the picture on the left. You can see a photograph, which is literally the view out of my workroom window. And I've just translated the colours of that into the lace edging of a shawl knitted in Shetland wool. And I've pulled that one after the rain. So that's some of the work that I've done that's around reflecting landscape, if you like, in the materials and in the work itself. And just wanted to talk briefly just for a moment or two about some of the things that we're hoping to do in the Eco Creative Cluster project, and particularly in relating to the dye garden. So once we get the garden which is in the grounds of the Rockfield Centre, up and running, and we're able to harvest some dye plants, there are three main techniques that we'll use to capture colour from those plants. Traditional dye methods of literally extracting the dyes into hot water and then dyeing them onto either fleece or yarn, if it's wool, or onto fabric as well. And this is a picture of a dye studio. It's a lot bigger than the studio that I have. This is in fact the dye studio in the Textile Centre in Blondos, which I had set up for a class that I was giving when I was there. But you can see along the top of the picture, you do need quite a lot of special equipment, or equipment that you can only use for dyeing when you're using these traditional methods. So you need pots that you're never going to use for anything else, and hot plates and jugs and measuring things and buckets. But the results can be quite good. These are the results of that particular class when we went out with a small group of students from an American university who were doing a summer school in the area, and we went out and we foraged and we got these three different plants. We got lady's bedstraw, gallium, we got alchemilla, which is lady's mantle, and we got lupin flowers. And then we set up 3 dye baths and dyed some wool, and none of them had ever done any dyeing before. So I think they were quite excited by the results. There's another dyeing technique that we can use, which requires far less in the way of equipment, but which takes much longer to get results. The traditional methods, the class that I showed you the results from in the last slide, those results were done in a matter of hours. Solar dyeing is a matter of months, so at least several weeks before you get your results. But the only equipment that you need really is some glass jars. And so I'm sure we'll do some solar dyeing once we get some plants, some dye materials from the garden. Because that's quite a nice method that people can do at home without very much equipment. And the results are generally pretty good. These are some samples of solar dyed yarns that I've done over the years. Quite a range of colours. from them. That's a fairly simple technique. It's well within the reach of most people in terms of having the right equipment. The other technique that we'll maybe explore would be botanical printing. This is quite different in that we use leaves or flowers to actually capture the shape as well as the colour onto either cloth or paper. And that can be wool cloth, but it could also be, as in this picture, linen or cotton or silk or any other natural fabric. There's a basic method of making sure that the leaves or flowers are in close contact with prepared fabric. It's usually you have to do some preparation to the fabric beforehand, tight, close contact, and then steaming or boiling. So this photograph is showing half a dozen silk scarves, which have been rolled with leaves and flowers against them and then rolled up very tightly and tied, and that's then ready to be steamed in the steamer. There are lots of variations on that technique so that you can make different results, and it depends so much on what's actually in the leaves or the flowers, and that bit's the bit that's out of your control. So there's always something really interesting and unexpected when you unroll the bundles. So this one does require a bit more in the way of equipment and is a bit more, if you like, a bit more of a specialized technique, but there are some simple ways that we can experiment with, perhaps with small groups, and we can do prints on paper like the ones on the left here. The one on the right is a silk scarf. I don't think it's one of the ones that was in that other photograph, but the same technique. And some prints on fabric with, sometimes you can use a dye as well so that you get a coloured background, or you can keep it very naturalistic. I think is the one that. So that's a quick romp through the kinds of techniques that we could be experimenting with once we've got some materials from the dye garden. And that's really me. Thank you very much for listening. I'll answer some questions later on if anybody's got. Just put it that now. Back to you now, Coach.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Deborah. That's really nice to learn in depth about your artistic journey. And then for the interview, I prepared some questions, and then while listening, I easily come up with different questions. But for now, for the interview section, I'll just follow what I prepared and then see how much time I can get. So I just for this small interview section, I prepared just 3 main questions. And the first question is about sustainability. I think your work really allows us to think about sustainability in a visual form. How you use plants grown by yourself or picked while your daily walks, or you use kitchen waste, or the cloth, and how you turn them into something that we can use and enjoy in our daily life, while you can meet new people through the activities and sell them sometimes, or teach how to make them to sustain your practice as a practitioner. So sorry for a rather broad question, but can you tell us a little bit about your view, approach, or maybe challenge towards the idea of sustainability?
Sure. I think, yeah, I like to use natural materials, which are more sustainable, where I can. If I'm not using wool, which is obviously, I think it's the ultimate in sustainable materials, it grows every year. Mm-hmm. Then if I'm using cotton or linen, which have more in the way of inputs into producing them, I do like to use pre-used fabrics where I can. In fact, almost entirely. The plants, I think, again, as you mentioned, you know, I use kitchen waste. I use things that I've grown myself, which means I've grown them organically. Or if I'm foraging, I'm really careful to think about what I'm doing in the environment. If I'm taking things from the wild, then I'm only using things that are very abundant, very common in that particular area. And I'm really careful not to take too much in any one place. And I think that's really important. If you're out gathering plants from the wild, for a start, there are legal restrictions around that, but even within that, you should never be taking more than, say, 10% in any one place as a rule of thumb, so that you have as little impact as possible. But it's good to use things that would otherwise go to waste. So I use onion skin. That's a really well-known thing for natural dyeing. Avocado pips make a good source of tannin for printing, as well as giving a nice pinkish dye themselves. Things like that. I recycle my tea leaves to make tannin for printing and save them up. But I make my cup of tea first. I think I have a bit of a rule too. If it's a food, you should eat it and just dye with the bit that you're not going to eat.
Yeah.
I think round about the botanical printing, that's very often known as eco-printing, and I'm a bit hesitant, although that is the most commonly used term for the technique, so I do use it, but I'm a bit hesitant about that because sometimes people can confuse eco with safe, and I think when it and also natural, and I think when it comes to natural dyeing and eco-printing, we have to be aware that although it may be safer than some other techniques, it's not entirely harmless and safe. And although the chemicals that I use in very dilute concentrations that are very unlikely to be harmful in that form, obviously I have to have them as crystals or more concentrated forms. So, you know, I think there are big questions around safety and environmental safety too. You have to think about how you would dispose of things.
Yeah, you said that I remember that you we should separate the sink, you know, the cooking sink and then the dyeing sink, because otherwise.
Oh yes, absolutely. And you know, there are lots of dyeing and printing online, and people post photographs, and sometimes when it's really obvious that they're doing it in their kitchen, I hope they're being careful, because it's if you can possibly do it somewhere other than in your kitchen, then please do.
And also, I think the sustainability, I think your teaching and then passing on the skill to other people, that contributes to the sustainability, I think, in in a way, you know, they keep because sounds like your technique and knowledge, I think, coming from by experimenting, rather than, you know, like I think books or that's one way to get knowledge.
Yeah.
But
yes, like, I think if you can pass on experience as well as knowledge and skills, and I've been teaching certainly spinning and natural dyeing for over 30 years, a long time. And there's you know, there are loads of people who really want to try these things out, and it can be a bit frustrating if you're just experimenting by yourself, and it's helpful if somebody can pass on a bit of useful experience, but still leave room for experimentation, because you know, we all learn from each other, and we all go on learning all the time as well.
Yeah. Is someone taught you?
I suppose lots of people taught me lots of different things. So,
no, like,
and at different times as well.
I kind of forgot to ask how you got into this world.
I suppose I started with spinning. I suppose really I started with knitting actually, and then the spinning came after that. But when I learned to spin in the late 1970s, and at that time there was a big sort of self-sufficiency trend, and I think it kind of came out of that to a great extent. Yeah. And then that's sort of that whole self-sufficiency thing kind of died away a bit, I think, maybe in the 80s and 90s. But more recently, it seemed, I think, as people are becoming perhaps a little bit more environmentally conscious and thinking about where the things that they consume come from and about how much they consume, I think now people are again becoming much more interested in making things for themselves and learning those sort of skills.
Yeah. More kind of heritage as well, and the skills, and then how those materials comes from in the first place and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Move on to the second question. Second question is about ecology. So I think there are different ways to come into understand and live with specific localities and their complex ecologies. Your practice and what we do in our eco-creative cluster project is one way, I think. Gardening, for instance, is one way to get to know about our locality, what kind of soil we have, what kind of climate or earthworms we have, etc., which could also tell us what the locality is not so good at, I think, how different from other places as well. So sorry, another broad question, but could you tell us a little bit about your view, approach, and maybe challenge towards the idea of ecology?
Yeah, I think particularly sort of relating that specifically to the Dye Garden project, there are lots of things that we would probably like to grow to create different colours that we may find are not necessarily going to grow very well in the climate that we have in Oban. If we want to dye blue, we really need to grow either indigo plants or Persicaria or woad, and indigo would be the one that would produce the most of the blue pigment, but I think it's unlikely that it would grow here. We could try, but we'd soon find out whether it would or wouldn't.
So it relates to sunlight.
And sunlight and temperature, yes.
Right, I see.
If we want to grow the Persicaria, which is another blue pigment producing plant, again, when I've grown that, I've needed a greenhouse to start it off to get it an early enough start, because the growing season isn't warm enough and long enough for it in Scotland. But if you can start it inside, then it is possible. But if we grow woad, then that will grow satisfactorily outside. So it's something about, we have to either choose the plants that we know will suit the climate that we've got, or we experiment and prepare to find out one way or another whether it'll work or not. And that would apply also for the type of soil. Some plants will do better in the soil, and I think that we will mostly be finding out by trial and error what will do well and what won't do well in the soil that we have.
That may be associated with the Alaskan lapins, is that right? In Iceland, they seems like that was successful. I mean,
yes, they have spread like mad. I think that's partly because nothing eats them, so there's no animals eating them, and they produce a huge amount of seed. So, and I mean, I think when they planted them, they knew that they would spread because that was the point, was to get them to spread, and so their roots would stabilize the soil. Because they're in the lupin family, they fix nitrogen into the soil, so as well as preventing it from blowing away, they would actually make it more nutritious. But in some areas where they've spread into land that's for grazing, for animals but the animals can't eat them, that's becoming a bit of a problem.
Mm.
Then on the other hand, they're attracting more insects, and that's improving the bird life. So I think it's quite controversial in Iceland about people thinking they're a good thing or a bad thing.
No, I'm not really specialized in this area, and then I didn't know about quite complex ecology going on down the ground. And yeah, once I asked, can I bring this seed to Sky? And one horticulture expert said that, yeah, we should think about it, because this area in Auburn has a specific, what's the worm called? I can't remember, but they quite could be vicious worm living around the area, and then that could, travel to Sky.
Oh, is that the flatworm, the New Zealand flatworm?
Maybe, yeah. That sounds, that rings
Yeah.
a bell, yeah. So
yeah, if you take plants with soil in the root, you could transfer that.
Yeah. So
that is nasty.
I didn't know about that kind of risk. If you do that by, how can I say, love, just so you think that that's a good thing, but it might be quite harmful for
yes.
the other side. So I kind of, that's interesting lesson, like something you think good might be not good for the another ecology system, so ecosystem. So
yeah. That's all we have to think about.
Question from Susan that's quite interesting that she's just put in the chat, which is,
okay.
Do the colours made from any plant part change according to the growth or the season?
Yes, they certainly could. I mean, the obvious thing about, if you're looking at, for example, going back to those Alaskan lupins, the flowers, which are only available in Iceland, they're probably only flowering for 4 weeks from the start of the flowering season until they're really going over. And they give a nice green. The leaves give yellow, but that yellow will shift through the year, and again they die away in the winter anyway. But you can also use the root, which gives a different shade of yellow, and I think that does vary quite a lot whether you take it in the summer or the winter. And something that's more perhaps widely available closer to home, silver birch leaves in the early part of the year when they've only just opened out will give a lovely clear yellow, but by the end of the summer they'll be giving a much more greeny color. So yeah, they certainly can change, and they can change in shade from one area where they're growing to another. So most of the plants that I used in Iceland were the same plants that I could use here, apart from the lupins, but whether I would get the same color, I'm not sure, and it would be interesting to try that out.
Great.
So yeah, that was an interesting question, Susan. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't recognize. Sorry, I didn't recognize the time. So it's a good time really to move on to maybe open up. I have one more question, but we think I can ask in the end. So we can open up the place.
Absolutely.
If anyone have a question,
feel free to just unmute and ask away if I'm not spotting a hand up.
Otherwise, I will. Yeah, I'll wait, and then if no hands is up, then maybe I will just ask my last question.
Absolutely, you ask away, and we'll see if someone's. Oh, hang on, we've got a question here.
Oh.
It says, "What new concept did you learn from the Icelandic textile artists?"
What did I learn from the Icelandic textile artists? I did learn a new embroidery stitch. That was a sort of fairly traditional stitch in Iceland. I don't know. I wasn't actually working with Icelandic textile artists at the time when I was in residence. There were other residents there who were from all over the place, apart from Iceland.
But you're getting some nice comments. Everyone is saying thank you for the presentation, and it's good to know more about your work, even though they've seen much of it before. But
Thank you, Diane.
learning more now.
Great.
And I
Okay.
think I saw a note from Elizabeth Culshaw earlier on saying that she was having to leave.
Yes.
Elizabeth does wonderful eco-printing. She's been teaching online, as have many of us, teaching online workshops. And she runs a program, as she's mentioned there, in Glasgow in a community garden. So it would be really nice once COVID is over if we can make contact there.
Oh, lovely.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm in contact with Elizabeth anyway, but if we can make contact between the two projects.
Yeah, no, that's actually, wow, it covers my last question. But my last question was that because weaving a network is one of the main aims of our project, just to grow this Dying with Plants network further, I just wondered that if you could give us one name of a practitioner who you are already in connection with and who uses similar techniques or materials?
Yeah. Well, funny you should say that, Naoko, because there's a comment here in the chat box from Liz Gaffney White, who's at Dalmally railway station.
Yes.
So she's really a close neighbour of ours.
Yes.
And Liz also has a dye garden and does workshops and ink and pigment making as well. So there we go. Hello, Liz.
Hi, Liz.
Oh, now we have your name and your details, Liz, and we know where to find you as well.
Yes, you just get off the train at Dalmally and there you are.
No, that's great. Well, Deborah enlightened me because I'm still quite new to this area, Auburn, and then every time I go back to Glasgow area, for instance, and then the pass Dalmally station, and then what's going on this station? It's like lots of flowers and then like really nice looking things going on. So I wanted to find out naturally, but Deborah said that yes, that's Liz doing everything, and then I saw some picture of you're making with a wool, like a blanket or scarf or with using natural, I mean the locally sourced materials, if I remember.
Yeah, I am on the platform just now. I'm just in pegloom weaving with raw fleece. So people who are waiting for the train can do a little bit.
All right. Ah, okay. No, every time I pass, I was really wanted to find out, but that's not quite a stop. I need to get out, so
Hopefully come and visit soon.
Yeah. How is Liz, your dye garden? How is it going, or are you planning to grow next season, or?
I have a lot of stock plants, and in fact, I shared some with Elizabeth as well. So we already have that network going, which is lovely. Oh, so I've been growing. I have a big 40-foot polytunnel, and I grow an awful lot of my dye plants in there. So I have a couple of indigo plants, but also a lot of sumacs and various things that I'd be happy to share with the garden once it gets set up.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we need a polytunnel too, but that's for later. Don't tell Eleanor; she'll have a.
Yeah, at the moment we are looking at not the too huge plot. It's like a quite kind of modest size, isn't it?
It's about 22 square meters, so quite small really, but it needs a bit of clearing, so it's enough to be getting on with.
In the comment, Elena is
yeah, I see that.
That does actually kind of lead us into the other question that's just been asked there. In developing your national network, what would its underlying purpose be, and what do you want to achieve?
That is a very good question. Well, we are I don't know how Rockfield Center think, but I certainly think that this is only 1-year project. It's just the beginning of long-term, network weaving project. So it's well, as I said, that it might bring up new collaborations, maybe, or new work kind of growing from this network building or weaving. So that's kind of thing we hope, and then especially Rockfield Center had just refurbished their really grand former primary school building. So it's because of this situation, it's nicely refurbished inside, beautiful, but sitting empty, kind of waiting for hosting lots of different activities. So growing networks, we might, as Elena says here, collaborations, about art project, more art project, or heritage is quite strong focus for the Rockfield Center as well. So more kind of cross-disciplinary project could be possible as well. So just a start.
Yeah, and I think also to be a resource for people who want to try different things and haven't tried them before, maybe don't consider themselves as being artists or creative, but just want to have a little dabble and try something out, and you never quite know where that's going to end.
I think that's, I've got no camera at the moment, I'm just a voice, but I would add that for the Rockfield Centre, it's just, I think it's a great springboard onto other things, and I think that's what a lot of the activity at Rockfield hopes to do, is that you can come along, try something that you've either done before and you want more knowledge, or do something completely new in a really comfortable, sort of safe setting, and then you can just run with it, and we will run with the practitioners and the creatives that come to us when they come to us with ideas. If we can do it, we will do it. So we hope it's the same with this project, that if you come to us, all these great connections in the chat box with ideas, get in touch with us, email us, contact Deborah or myself. My email's in the chat box there. It's arts@therockfieldcentre.org.uk. And we'll get you all in a database, and then when we can get on site, when we can do workshops, it will be great to have you all there doing them with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think, unless anyone has any more questions, we'll probably round it up, because we've done a very neat hour, which was
sorry.
quite good. No, I think it's a perfect amount of time. So I've got Eleanor's got her hand up. You may speak, Eleanor. Oh, she's clapping. I'm not sure if Eleanor has a question or if she's just.
I just want to say thank you for a great presentation tonight. That was really good, really good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great.
So I'll do it.
Yes. Okay, so I've got a little bit. Yes. Well, we can kind of easily carry on for another hour, but I see the time, and it's Friday night in Scotland, so I'll just probably wrap up event here. But yes, if you have a follow-up comments and questions, please feel free, as Fee said, that please send them to us, and we are more than happy to receive any comments and questions. And then on behalf of all the project team, I would like to thank Deborah once again for sharing her practice today, and Fee for your brilliant, as always, support and organization, and everyone for coming along and tuning in for the event. And the next conversation, hopefully, is coming in a kind of month's time. So please keep your eyes peeled for any updates on the Rockfield Center's website or social media channels. You can follow our project and how it's growing through hashtag Eco Creative Cluster also, or what you do is actually closely linked to our project. Please feel free to use this hashtag and then share your practice or story. That would be really, really good. So that's us. If you don't have anything to add, Fee, Deborah, Elena.
I think that's it.
Very much, everybody.
And thank you very much, Deborah, for the presentation. And
Yeah,
thank you
that's
all
great.
for being here to listen.